Pretty sweet intro, right? Yeah, so I originally wanted this to be an episode of Solo Dives, but I recently lost the space I'd been using for that set, so it really wasn't going to work out. Not to mention, it really didn't fit the Solo Dives formula very well, so without further ado, here is the video. Hello, hi, welcome to the cesspool. So yeah, I got to ride the 20th Century Limited. Okay, well, obviously not the actual 20th Century Limited, but the authentic experience provided by the exclusive excursions put on by the very nice people at the United Railroad Historical Society of New Jersey. The society owns the only remaining observation car, the Hickory Creek of the 1948 20th Century Limited train set, and has restored it meticulously to its original glory. The trip included a 4-course meal and breathtaking views of the Hudson that really could only be appreciated by the lookout lounge of the Century's observation car. Also, I can't forget to mention that the URHS also has the Tavern Lounge car number 43, also from the New York Central Railroad, as a more budget-friendly option. It is mostly a BYO policy for food and drink, however they did provide sandwiches, which was nice, and the atmosphere is still the same as the car was built in 1947. So while the original 20th Century Limited was a New York to Chicago intercity train for the uber-rich and famous of the period, today it was traveling between New York and Albany, with a bunch of lucky train nerds and curious outsiders looking for a once-in-a-lifetime experience. This was a round trip, so the experience lasted a bit over 5 hours with a layover in Albany while they turned around the equipment for the return trip. I arrived at Penn Station at 10 a.m. as instructed and had access to Amtrak's Metropolitan Lounge in the new Moynihan Train Hall portion of Penn Station. I have a lot of mixed feelings about Moynihan. On the one hand, yeah, it's an obvious upgrade over the disgusting basement of a subpar sports arena. But on the other hand, it doesn't change any of the logistical issues that Penn Station faces. Not to mention, it doesn't serve New Jersey Transit, which is a massive portion of the Penn Station traffic. Also, it's just not that nice. I mean, the Farley Post Office is a beautiful building, but the actual public space built for Moynihan just feels so sterile and corporate. It has none of the elegance or warmth that the Farley portrays from its exterior. Anyway, I'm getting off track. So yes, the Amtrak Lounge was nice enough. It was a good bonus to the fairly pricey tickets. At 11:20, we all rounded up with the members of the URHS and were guided down to the excursion cars. The red carpet was laid out, which was a very nice touch. However, it was missing the 20th Century Limited golden logo, but that's really nitpicking. Stepping onto the Hickory Creek really was an incredible moment. As someone who really hadn't had much experience in antique rail equipment other than museums and the occasional tourist railroad, this was on a whole other level. The whole car seemed alive with plenty of staff, and the atmosphere was super casual, if that makes any sense. Everyone just acted like this was a normal thing when it obviously was not. There wasn't any over-enthusiastic announcers spewing out history facts and silly tourist-type attractions or entertainment. It was just a civilized train trip. We pulled out Penn Station right on time and made our way out onto the water level route, now Metro North's Hudson Line. I was in the first group to sit down for our meal, so I took a seat across from a nice couple who lived only a few towns over, coincidentally enough. The food was fantastic. We started with an appetizer and moved over to a salad, then the main course, and finally the dessert. It was all delicious, and the chef was from a great restaurant called Penn Station 1904, just down the way from the URHS's headquarters, actually. I also have to give a mention to our server, Hannah, who was also from Penn Station. She was fantastic throughout the entire trip. So after lunch, we moved back to the lounge section of the car, which is really where I got most of my footage. We passed the beautiful cliff faces of the Palisades, which seemed much more dramatic from this side of the river compared to the New Jersey side. The new Tappan Zee Bridge, I'm not calling it the Cuomo Bridge, I refuse to give that man any satisfaction, was surprisingly impressive from the shoreline. Of course, the Catskills were beautiful, the Bear Mountain Bridge, the Storm King Highway, Bannerman's Island. It was all on display and gorgeous. It definitely helped that the weather had given us the perfect day. We also went through a bunch of historic towns along the Hudson. Peekskill, Cold Spring, Beacon, Poughkeepsie, and Hudson, just to name a few. A lot of these towns still have their original New York Central Railroad stations, which are very beautiful in their own right. Hudson in particular has a gorgeous station. If you ever stop in that town, you have to check out the station. We also caught a foamer at the crossing here, which was pretty funny. Someone even suggested mooning the guy, which just would have been absolutely hilarious, but obviously inappropriate. Now, the scenery was all well and good, but I know what you're asking. What about the bathroom? Oh, well, don't you worry, because I've got you covered. The bathroom on the Hickory Creek was tiny. I mean, seriously, the smallest bathroom I'd ever been in. Worse than New Jersey Transit, worse than Amtrak, worse than the airlines. It was microscopic, and I loved it. It had this tiny little folding sink and glazed windows, and everything just fit so meticulously into a small space. Alright, bathroom talk over. We pulled into Albany right on time, around 2 o'clock, where the train would be turned around. While we were waiting, I spotted some other private cars, so I went down and checked them out. The Northern Pacific domes in particular were seriously beautiful. We were in Albany for a bit longer than expected, though. From what I understand, it was just Amtrak being Amtrak, so we didn't leave until around 4:45. This really was out of the control of the URHS, so I don't really want to put any blame on them for the delays. We were all at the mercy of the Amtrak gods of incompetence. On the return trip, I was determined to get the best seat in the house, facing directly back with windows all around me. So I was the first one on board and triumphantly snatched the seat. It was sort of a surreal experience. I'd never really been in an observation car when it was in motion, so just seeing the tracks and scenery move back from where I was sitting was sort of disorienting for a second, but once you get used to it, it is seriously something special. Now, I wasn't one to hog the best seat in the house for the whole trip, so I gave up my spot about an hour or so and took one of the single armchairs on the left side, which was still facing the Hudson River. With the sun setting in the west, unfortunately, a lot of scenery started to become backlit, but it shined this amazing yellow glow inside the car, which was seriously beautiful. Now, while there was no full meal service on the return trip, we were served a bunch of small appetizers, and of course drinks were still available. The return trip was also when a few of the members of the URHS went around and started to make conversation. Anthony was the person we talked to the most. He's the guy in the dark suit leaning against the wall and some of the clips here. Very nice guy with a lot of info. We also met and talked a bit with Kevin, who was the URHS's president. Also a super nice guy and gave a great speech at the end of the trip. So we pulled into Amtrak's Penn Station at around 7:20 p.m., which was a bit behind schedule, but again, Amtrak be Amtrak. All in all, the trip was amazing. Once in a lifetime experience. Getting tickets for this was extremely difficult, but was so well worth it. It was the most civilized experience I had ever had. The people were all pleasant, respectful, and friendly. The service was phenomenal. The atmosphere was authentic and just pleasant. The views were breathtaking, and Hickory Creek itself was obviously gorgeous inside and out. There's a reason the 20th Century Limited was called the most famous train in the world, and the people of the URHS really showed that to everyone who has had the pleasure to take this trip. And now you might be thinking that this is the end of the story. I mean, the trip is over, right? I had had my fun, now it's time to head home and get back to the regular routine. But what I didn't know at the time was that a series of events following the trip would lead to my worldview changing, and definitely changing for the worse, I'm afraid. Alright, so it's about 7:30 at this point. I'm out on 34th Street in Manhattan. I take the PATH from 33rd to Hoboken, where I catch a train home. I personally think PATH is a pretty good service. I mean, it's clean, pretty consistent, and efficient. I had no issues getting in and out. It certainly wasn't the 20th Century Limited, but it got the job done. Now, I get to Hoboken at around 8:30, which is this magnificent train station. It's got this grand waiting room with tons of massive windows and stained glass. Its exterior is all copper, and it has these awesome lit Lackawanna signs on the ferry terminal and on the clock tower. Seriously, just beautiful from a more civilized, bygone era. Anyway, I checked the departures for the train I needed to take, and it turns out the next train isn't until 9:20. I'm thinking, well, damn, I guess I'm stuck here for a while, but it's alright. It's after rush hour, so I've got this big, beautiful building pretty much all to myself. After the day I've had, it'll be nice to just relax in the waiting room for a while and decompress. I really hadn't slept at all the night before, which was probably a mix of being excited for the trip and my usual insomnia. So, as a result of not sleeping, I had a bit of a headache, but it wasn't something a little quiet and rest couldn't fix. I sat down on one of the beautiful waiting room benches and just settled in for a while. My phone was pretty much dead, so I didn't have much to do, but that was alright. So I sat there for about 5 minutes before I looked across from me where two older people seemed to probably be homeless were having a conversation. I always have felt sympathy for the less fortunate, and I know in a lot of cases they are just people who have had it rough in life. They weren't bothering anyone, and I didn't feel uncomfortable by them being there, so I just went back to resting my eyes when a young family walked in. Mother, father, and who I would probably assume is an aunt of 4 young kids. One is probably less than a year old, the other maybe 3, another 5, and the oldest 8. The adults are all on their phones and just let the kids run wild in the waiting room. The toddler is just screaming at the top of their lungs. The 5-year-old is chasing them around and climbing on everything. I'm talking about the benches, the old shoe shining station, the stairs, everything. The 8-year-old is just antagonizing the younger ones. The baby was surprisingly the only one who was actually being quiet. This went on for the next 45 minutes, non-stop. My already depleted brain just could not handle the screaming. It gave me a raging headache and just put me in an awful mood. It pissed me off to no end, not that the kids were being rambunctious, I mean, while they're kids, they do that. It's more that the parents just sat there and did absolutely nothing while their children were defiling the waiting room. I sat there and watched the father slowly walk around one of the benches on his phone while his daughter ran around the same bench and lapped him and just screamed at the top of her lungs. Like it was as if he was trying to make it look like he was going to try to stop her, but he just didn't care enough to actually do it. And again, this was non-stop for 45 minutes. What really added insult to injury was this pigeon, which must have managed its way into the building somehow, was swooping down, making the kids scream even more, and just crapping all over the gorgeous detail of the waiting room. I actually got a picture of the bird. It was the only picture I took from that entire experience. Now you might be wondering why I didn't just go out to the concourse. I mean, I'd be away from the kids. There weren't actually any benches, but at least it would be quiet. Now, I would have done that. Trust me, I would have done that. But it was at least 95 degrees outside with some serious humidity. And as someone with pretty low heat tolerance and a raging headache already, I was pretty much stuck between a rock and a hard place in terms of where I was going to wait. So finally, the time comes for me to board the train home. I'd taken this train 100 times before and knew at this hour it would be nice and quiet. I literally ran out of the waiting room and hopped onto the closest car of the train. It was a few minutes before departure, so some of the passengers were already on board. A sleeping commuter here, an odd day tripper there. I passed them and tried to move to the next car. I could hear there was this big group in the car and wanted to find a quieter place for the trip. Especially after the experience I had had in the waiting room, I was just not in the mood. As I got closer to the group, I noticed that they were about 8 middle-aged white women. They were just totally drunk out of their minds, probably after a party in the city or something. It's totally understandable. I went to pass them and one tapped me on the shoulder. I turned to look at her and she said to me, "Hey there, hot stuff." I simply turned forward and walked to the next car, picking up the pace a little bit. Now, you've seen my face enough on this channel to know I'm not exactly anyone's definition of hot stuff. But that was really just the cherry on top. I was disgusted. One of the best days I had had in years had just turned into the worst over the course of about an hour. On the trip home, with my head just throbbing, I thought a lot about what I had experienced that day and had came to a sad conclusion. Maybe we don't deserve experiences like the 20th Century Limited as a society anymore. I mean, that was the most civilized experience I could remember. But it was totally commonplace 70 to 80 years ago. Now, I don't want to go and say, oh man, the 40s were better. I wish I was born in the 40s. No, I'm not saying that. I love modern life. The innovation brought by both on a social and technological level is unmatched. I don't think anyone born in the past 40 years could realistically live in the 40s. But what I am saying is that during that time, and for much time before that, we were a much more civilized society. From what I experienced in that waiting room that night, the designers of that building would never dream of occurring. They built it for a more civilized age that would appreciate it and those around them. And while not every train during the time was the 20th Century Limited, they were all beautiful with just a ton of style, detail, and class that we just don't have today. The designers of those rail cars and locomotives expected a civilized society to ride them and have respect for them. Ultimately, I don't think we as a society deserve things like that anymore. There's a reason we don't do things like we used to. It's because our standards are so low and we don't respect anything or anyone else around us. When we build a new building now, it's just a glass stick or a cookie cutter 5/1 complex. And the builders know that the people will just be fine with that. 100 years ago, we would expect more. Even the tenement buildings of New York had more style and quality to them. And as much as I'd love for that class and style to come back, I realize now that it really never will. There are plenty of people who appreciate it, but as a whole society, we just expect less, treat people worse, and as a result, get the lowest common denominator. It's just a depressing fact. I honestly don't know if any of what I just said was intelligible. I know that this is a very cynical and glass is half empty type of opinion, and I should be more hopeful for the future that one day we could return to a more civilized age where everyone is polite and respects each other and their environment. I honestly do hope that. I really, really do. I'm just not counting on it coming to fruition anytime soon. Riding the 20th Century Limited was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It was an incredible experience and really gave me a sense of what it would be like to experience the train in its heyday. I just wish when I returned to the modern world, it would have been a bit more welcoming. The people at the URHS put on a fantastic excursion, and I couldn't recommend checking them out enough. Thank you all so much for watching. This isn't a video I normally make, but I felt I should document my experience, not only to commend the work of the URHS, but to leave a bit of commentary on our society, even if it's a hard pill to swallow for some. Then again, I'm just a cynical bastard, so take what I say with a grain of salt. Anyway, I'll be back next week or something for another episode of Solo Dives. See you guys then.